Welcome back to Wrongfully Convicted News, where we fill you in on all there is to know about wrongful convictions in North America. Hold on, this just in. We are getting reports of a situation happening in Central Park. Let's go to the scene for more information. The scene behind me is where the story begins. Let me set the scene for you. It's April 19th, 1989, and the rape of Patricia Miley has just occurred in Central Park in New York City. On this night, at about 9 p.m., approximately 30 teenagers from Harlem entered the park and facilitated multiple attacks, including assaults and robberies of bikers and joggers. These victims began to call in these attacks to the police. Later on this night, at around 1:30 a.m., a female jogger was found in the park, pulled off the path, beaten, and raped. When police were dispatched to the park that night, they arrested 20 teenagers, including 14-year-old Raymond Santana and 14-year-old Kevin Richardson. The next day, police were eager to apprehend more suspects and arrested 15-year-old Antron McCrae, 15-year-old Yusuf Salam, and 16-year-old Corey Wise, after being identified by other boys at the scene. Together, these 5 teenagers would become known as the Central Park Five. Back to you in the studio. This crime would become a well-known case in the world as young men became suspects in a rape and assault case. For now, we will focus on one of the boys in particular, 16-year-old Corey Wise. Although Corey was later arrested, initially he was not a suspect in the case. He had not been involved, but when his friend Yusuf Salam was being arrested, he made the decision to accompany him to the police station for moral support. This was a decision that would change the course of his life forever. At the station, Kevin, Antron, Raymond, and Yusuf were all questioned by police, but because they were innocent and had no knowledge of the incident, their stories weren't adding up. They decided to question Corey as well, even though he was not on the suspect list. The 5 boys were interrogated for at least 7 hours each before detectives decided to try and record their statements as videotaped confessions. Raymond, Antron, and Kevin all made statements with their parents present because they were underage and it was their right to have them there, and illegal to get statements without them. Yusuf had told police that he was 16, and therefore his parents no longer had the right to be present with him while being questioned by police. Yusuf's mother, however, arrived at the station before Yusuf had made a tape and demanded a lawyer for her, in fact, 15-year-old son. The oldest of the boys was Corey, and he made multiple statements that seemingly admitted guilt, without the presence of his parents or legal counsel. The videotape confessions were the main source of guilt in the upcoming trials, despite the fact that they were coerced. None of the DNA found at the crime scene or on Patricia Miley matched any of the boys. 2 semen samples that were both found to have belonged to one unidentified man also didn't match the DNA of any of the boys. Despite this fact and no physical evidence connecting any of them to the crime, they were all convicted in 1990. Corey Wise's story was different, however, as he was the only one of the boys to be tried and convicted as an adult, while the others were tried as minors and sentenced to 5 to 10 years in a youth correctional facility. Corey was sentenced to 5 to 15 years, all of which were spent in an adult prison for assault, sexual abuse, and rioting. Looking back at Corey's case with the knowledge we have of wrongful convictions, there were multiple factors that led to the wrongful conviction of Corey Wise, as well as him getting the treatment that he did. These were age, race, media pressure and coverage, and false confessions. The first is age. Because Corey was 16 at the time of his conviction, he was tried and convicted as an adult. This drastically changed his experience in that he served all of his prison sentence in adult prisons. Some might look at this as a very blanketed blessing in disguise, but this is where he actually met the real rapist of Patricia Miley. Age also played a factor in this case because youth are more susceptible to produce false confessions for a couple of reasons. The first and main reason is because they are more likely to say what they have to say so that they can get out of the situation, meaning they are willing to tell an officer what they want to hear, whether it is the truth or not. This is precisely what happened to Corey. He was pressured by police to sell a certain story, so in the moment, being scared and not thinking about possible consequences of his statements, he told a lie that quickly spiraled out of control. Another significant factor was race. Corey was a black teenager in New York City in the 80s, which was still a somewhat racist time in the States. In addition, all of the other teenagers that were arrested on that fateful night were all people of color. This focus on race also could have contributed to the oversight of the real perpetrator of these crimes, Mateus Reyes. Because there was such pressure for police to make an arrest, and the other incidents that night provided a group of easily blamable teenagers, the prosecutor on the case, Linda Fairstein, chose to ignore all of the facts that pointed to the 5 teenage boys not being the perpetrators. This ranged from only a single person's DNA being found at the scene and on the body, the track marks where Patricia was dragged were only made by one person, and the very obvious facts that the boys had no knowledge of the incident, as well as the timing of the events not adding up. Race also played a part on behalf of the victim. Patricia Miley was a white 28-year-old woman, a graduate from Yale, and a rising star at a well-known investment bank. She was allegedly raped by a group of black and Latino youths. Patricia's credentials and background put pressure on officials to solve the case hastily. Reverend Calvin Butts from a Baptist church in Harlem said to the New York Times, "The first thing you do in the United States of America when a white woman is raped is round up a bunch of black youths, and I think that's what happened here." This leads to the next factor of media pressure and coverage. In 1990, the New York Times characterized the attack as one of the most widely publicized crimes of the 1980s. As we know, the media plays a huge part in how we get our information. It also influences how we think about certain topics. The media can also play a part in wrongful convictions. It puts pressure on law enforcement to make an arrest and solve the case. This is especially true when there are other factors that society holds at a high value, like the age and race of the victim. The way that the media frames a case can greatly influence public perception of it. With this case, there was mixed coverage from the media. There were those that stood with the teenagers, mostly in the black community, that didn't believe they were responsible for the crimes. On April 26, 1989, the New York Times posted a cautionary editorial against the use of labels in questioning why such well-adjusted youngsters could have committed such a savage crime. There were also the people that were strongly blaming the teenagers for the attack, like Donald Trump, a real estate tycoon at the time. He called for the return of the death penalty and took out full-page ads in the 4 major papers in New York to support his beliefs. Yusuf Salaam told The Guardian in 2016 that Trump was a fire starter, and his actions in the media manipulated and swayed others into believing they were guilty. The most obvious factor that contributed to the wrongful conviction of Corey Wise and the rest of the Central Park Five was the false confessions elicited by police tactics. False confessions are one of the leading causes of wrongful convictions. The Reid technique is one of the most widely used police interrogation procedures in North America. One of the characteristics in the Reid technique is to put the suspect in a position that they will want to remove themselves from. This is done by isolating them and depriving them of basic necessities. For Corey Wise, he was interrogated for at least 7 hours without food, water, or bathroom breaks. Yusuf Salaam also said that he could hear police beating Corey in the next room, then telling him he would be next. Being scared, stressed, and anxious can definitely produce a false confession. Another aspect of false confessions is the investigator claiming to help. After Corey was beaten, another investigator came in the room and initiated part of the Reid model that is geared towards the illusion of helping and hope, essentially playing good cop, bad cop. He told Corey that if he just cooperated and told them what they wanted to hear, he would be able to leave. Corey Wise was unaware of what had happened in the park at the time, so investigators essentially fed him the information in order for him to make a confession. When police are told to use the Reed model, they form a type of tunnel vision where they zero in on a suspect, or suspects in this case, and presume them guilty without all the evidence and seeing other options. This is what happened to Corey Wise and the other teenagers. Because they happened to be near the crime scene on that day, the color of their skin, and the other crimes that took place that night, it started to narrow the police's tunnel into believing they were guilty. Because they had already made that decision, everything else that followed, including the interrogations, were all about confirming their guilt, even if it meant telling them the information in order for it to be true. To this day, the boys still blame Linda Fairstein for their incarceration, but the truth is, although she was an innocence denier, refusing to accept that they weren't guilty despite all evidence proving otherwise, it was not just her that failed them, but the system as a whole. In 2001, the real perpetrator of the Patricia Miley attack, Mateus Reyes, came forward and confessed to the attack. He had actually met Corey on 2 separate occasions while being incarcerated. The first was while they were both imprisoned at Rikers Island and got into a fight over the television. The second was when they were imprisoned at Auburn Correctional Facility in 2001, where they had a friendly conversation in the prison yard. That same year, Mateus Reyes confessed to raping and almost killing Patricia Miley. He had felt guilty seeing Corey still in prison for a crime that he didn't commit. DNA evidence confirmed that Reyes was in fact the perpetrator. The same year that Patricia Miley was attacked, a string of rapes occurred in New York City when police realized they were dealing with a serial rapist. Reyes confessed to the crimes and was convicted and sentenced to 33 years in prison after accepting a plea deal. The fact that the MO of the Central Park attack closely matched the other attacks performed by Reyes makes it difficult to believe that police were not racially and otherwise motivated to convict innocent teenage boys. Confession by Reyes, the convictions of Raymond Santana, Kevin Richardson, Antron McCrae, Yusuf Salam, and Corey Wise were vacated, with Corey being the only one of the 5 still incarcerated at the time. They were exonerated and were also able to be removed from the sex offender registry. In 2003, the 5 boys, now men, filed a lawsuit against the city of New York, which the city refused to settle until 2014, when they agreed to settle for $41 million. Kevin, Antron, Raymond, and Yusuf each received around $7.1 million, while Corey received $12.2 million because he had served 6 more years than the others. In 2015, Corey donated $190,000 to the University of Colorado Law School Innocence Project, which they later renamed the Corey Wise Innocent Project. Corey Wise is the only one of the Central Park 5 to still live in New York City. He lives in a condo overlooking Central Park and is now an activist advocating for criminal justice reform. Well, folks, thank you for joining us for another episode of Wrongfully Convicted News. Join us next time when we talk more about the Central Park jogger case and even look into the real criminal, Mateus Reyes, as well as talk more about When They See Us, the greatly depicted dramatized miniseries of the Central Park jogger case released in 2019. This is Leanna, signing off.